Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Welcome back to the New Mainstream podcast, where we explore the intersections of culture, business, and innovation. I'm your host, Mario Xavier Carrasco. Today, thrilled to welcome back special guest Whitney Dunlap-Fowler, brilliant mind behind Touch of Whit Creative. Whitney's a cultural strategist, brand strategist, semiotician. And Whitney was one of our first guests when we launched the New Mainstream podcast. Wow, this is probably 6-7 years ago. I don't know if you remember, Whitney.
I did not know that I was one of your first guests.
Yeah, you were one of our first guests.
Oh, so that's awesome, Mario.
one of our first return guests. So welcome back. Going to be talking about your latest report I saw that you published on shifts and determinants of masculinity. Great analysis. We've been talking about a little bit before the podcast and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just dive right in. What inspired you to do this report? I kind of have a feeling, but share with the listener.
Yeah, many things, right? One, for my personal life, I'm a woman who is dating or actually not dating. I've chosen to stop dating, so that could be one. Two, from my work world, I am increasingly getting requests to understand like the shifting state of masculinity. As you know, I think men are definitely growing as a populace that brands want to understand and connect with on a deeper level. And then probably three is just being a cultural strategist means that I'm always plugged in and reading and seeing what's happening. And social media is a place that is ripe with gender wars and gender, evolutions and conversations. But in particular, I saw something that we'll talk about later on that kind of piqued my interest and made me want to like write down like a little bit more in depth what's happening in the space of masculinity.
Yeah. So why I reached out to you and like downloaded the report. I mean, one, I always enjoy your work. But two, like I saw Mark Zuckerberg's comments on the Rogan podcast. I didn't watch the whole podcast, but I saw about the whole masculine energy. So I was like, okay, is this taken out of context? So I watched that part of the interview and I was surprised by it.
I love that you gave him the benefit of the doubt. I love that you said, maybe this is taking it out of context.
And yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to be like that guy on, that just gets upset over every clip. But yeah, it was, and like, obviously something I've been, it's not new, right? I mean, we saw the whole Andrew Tate thing. You mentioned another influencer, I'm forgetting his name. He talks about the value man or something.
Kevin Samuels.
Rest in peace. Kevin Samuels. And like, I thought this was like fringe stuff, but it's not. It's like, it seems to reach the mainstream. And then your report, I was like, oh, okay. It gave me some bearings.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it makes sense to think that it's fringe stuff because if I'm being honest, these conversations were happening on Twitter. I'm emphasizing Twitter because this is before Mr. Musk. I call him Mr. Musty, but I'm not going to say that.
we could say Mr. Musty now that people know.
Yeah. Before he took over, this was happening on Twitter at a rapid rate. And, there's this whole kind of like, oh, get off the internet and touch grass thing. And so I too thought that these were conversations just happening in the social media sphere until when I would go out and date and I would hear men kind of echo a lot of the sentiments that I was seeing online. That was actually very alarming to me, if I'm being honest, because I'm like, who's having social media conversations in real life,
And these are, and like, I know you, Whitney, like you're educated, professional. You're not dating the the guys in mom's basement. Like, these are, I'm assuming, educated people kind of spewing stuff that again, you would think it was like, I don't know, bullies on the internet. but it's
Yeah,
like more mainstream than that.
exactly. And I think at that point, it didn't have a complete hold over men the way it does today, but it was happening. And I was taking notice of it, again, years ago. Now, I said before we began, like, I haven't dated for the past 2 years by choice because the landscape is just horrible. And since that time, podcast bros have become a thing. And like, I think what's happened is, I don't know why podcasts became what they are. I actually don't listen to podcasts, but men started sharing things freely without us ever questioning why they do what they do or who they are. They just kind of wanted to sit around and talk. And I think from that, women have learned a great deal about how they feel about women, how they feel about themselves, their place in society, and what they feel that they are owed. And women have kind of set up, paid attention. My mom always said, when a man tells you who he is, believe him. You know what I mean? That along with, I don't know if you ever read these like Reddit posts or like, am I the AITA? I don't want to curse on your platform. Am I the idiot? Okay, am I the
But yeah,
asshole?
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't done deep dive into them, but I've seen like some
Yeah, you'll see kind of
interesting
rogue
ones.
posts come from here and there, and they're always posts about a husband doing just horrible things to his wife, or a wife receiving horrible treatment from her husband. And, it kind of makes it say, oh my gosh, this isn't just in the dating world, like, this is happening with marriages and people who
Mhm.
are like betrothed and with each other for life. We're increasingly hearing stories about regret and just mistreatment. And what's happening is women are like happily divorcing men and like never getting married again. So this is an epidemic that's happening and impacting the dating world, but also impacting the way masculinity is being formed over time here.
Yeah, and so your framework in the report, you've kind of laid out three categories. You talk about expiring, evolving, and emerging. Let's talk a little bit about expiring. Like, what are some of the old markers that you've seen um, of masculinity that are fading out, and why do you think they're fading out?
Yeah, before I get to expiring, like, we also need to just make sure we understand that masculinity and definitions of it, and
Yes.
how it exists have been built in direct contrast of femininity, which means that anything that is perceived as feminine cannot also be masculine, or at least cannot be accessed by men, or should not be accessed by men, because the men who do access those spaces, those traits, if you will, are deemed less masculine, less manly, right? So the job of a man in today's society is to appear as manly as possible at all points in his life. And is if he is seen as dipping into anything that is considered feminine, it's like the worst thing in the world that could happen to him, right? And this is actually why we're seeing a lot of men kind of revolt from higher education, because too many women are going to school and they're seeing it as a feminine space. This is why nursing used to be dominated by men, and now it's actually dominated by women, because male flight has happened in that particular space. And they're saying, well, if women can do it, I can't. I'm not going to be in there. I have to be in a manlier role. So when we're thinking about these determinants of masculinity, it's these kind of new ways for men to assert their either dominance, superiority, power, or whatever that might be, in a society that has always said that they are at the top, but in a society where women are gaining inroads in some spaces that men were not expecting us to gain inroads in. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it's I mean, I don't know if this is related, but it's like it's concerning and sad seeing that because I think as an older millennial, 80s and 90s, right? Like growing up as a kid, as a male, right? Like you like how kids made fun of each other was like, oh, you're a girl or whatever, right? Um, but it was nice to see as I got older that that was changing
Mm-hmm.
and men could start to express their a feminine side or more feminine traits and embracing things that's crazy to think that are associated with feminism, like mental health, like shouldn't that should just be human out, but
Yeah.
like it felt good, right? As a man that's happy to embrace feminine qualities, and I think it was good for like men because we suffer from higher suicide rates, like loneliness, etc. Um, so it's really again this whole thing. I mean, and this is maybe a different conversation, but it's just like where this is all going is really just not good for men overall or
Uh,
women, obviously.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think that there's hope at the end of all of this, but it is going to get messy in the middle. And to your point, masculinity has definitely expanded over time. Society has allowed, what's permissible for men to exist, and we'll talk about that in this framework. But it didn't come without, tension. And in some parts of the population, mental health is still like not welcome, but conversations around it are, so we're making forward movement. And anytime I talk to my clients about forward movement and masculinity, I always say, like, listen, I think people put women on this pedestal of like, oh, look at what women have done. Look what they've changed. It has taken decades, okay, like years for us to get where we are. And within our fights for equality and to get where we have gotten, we have often fought with each other, So this should be expected to happen as men are in this point of tension. This is your changing moment, or the changing moment for men, and it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be smooth. We're talking about a populace that doesn't know how to deal with their emotions, and are trying to figure this out for the first time. So they'll get there. It'll just be a bumpy ride in the meantime. But let's talk about this framework. When we talk about the expiring determinants of masculinity, the number one that is expiring is this kind of money and proximity to women. For a long time, masculinity, manhood was determined by one's proximity to women and sex. This kind of macho man who could get all the girls and who looked the part, suave, debonair, really handsome man, well put together. That was the societal definition of masculinity. And so that would lead to, actually, I wrote this example down before I got on here. That would lead to things like, unfortunately, we'd all know about Diddy, right? Um, but did things like allegedly put Usher and Justin Bieber in highly sexual environments, because for him and many others like him, that was like the litmus test. Like, are you a man or are you a boy? And he did that to them at very young ages. And a lot of men who were in their younger ages probably experienced sex or sexual situations much earlier than they should have, because an older generation man was saying, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what makes you a man. This is how you're supposed to be, And so the great thing that has happened, thanks to just shifts in culture and society, is that has become an icky thing. And who to thunk it? And let's be clear, it probably always was an icky thing, Mario, but it's just become societally unacceptable today, as we're learning about how men were possibly abused in their childhood. There's more room for men to confess to being molested in their childhood. And there's more opportunity for men to say, I was never comfortable in these situations, or I was around really aggressive women when I was young, or just, the idea, for even in the dating space for women. I think there was a survey that I read where people think that promiscuity with men is just not an attractive trait anymore. It shows lack of discipline, and therefore lack of leadership in a man, So we're at an interesting point where all of that hypersexual, good looking man, that trope, that, the perpetual bachelor, it's kind of coming to an end as far as what's desirable in a determinant of masculinity, as women seek more intellectual curiosity and emotional expanse within a man, if you will.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you're saying that, I mean, I just remember, yeah, those were the images that I grew up with. Like, and I just like MTV and Real World and all of that was just, and I was a kid watching this stuff, which is kind of crazy to think about.
So was I. So
Yeah.
that showed you what you were supposed to be as a man, and it showed me what you were supposed to be as a man, you know?
Yeah.
And none of us had a choice in it, specifically. I think millennials have done a good job of like starting to push things in a different direction, and then Gen Z came in and just pushed it off a cliff and said, actually, this is not for me. They're not even having sex the way that we were conditioned to have sex. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a completely different concept for them. I was reading something that said Gen Z wants to see less sex and romance roles, scenes in movies. They find it very uncomfortable. Can you imagine? Like, I found that really interesting because we never had that opportunity to say, actually, this is weird in this film. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I'm thinking about this. So I have young children. They're 11 and 9. And I think like most parents, right, you start to get um, nostalgic and you want to show your kids movies that you grew up on. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, every movie I put on was inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what did I want? And like movies you would never think, like The Goonies, like that was like quintessential, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I put it on and then it starts with like guns and violence. Like
Mm-hmm.
I completely forgot that part. Um, The Mighty Ducks, love that movie. It's like bullying and like just coarse like language. I don't know. It's just related to this, right? Yeah, it's just totally different now in this context. So I just stopped showing them movies that I
Gotta wait till they're like 18.
grew up with.
They're like, Dad, you grew up in debauchery. Like, yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Like,
literally.
uh, so yeah, so while that's expiring, the interesting place that we are in with masculinity is fatherhood. Speaking of your kids, fatherhood and family involvement. And I think that we've come here for a couple of reasons, right? When you think about definitions of masculinity, the two things that always kind of have popped up historically is this idea of someone being a protector and a provider. Well, the provider part is a little shaky right now as women are earning sometimes more than their male partners. They are more highly educated than a lot of men out here today that are single. They are pulling their weight and they are able to provide for themselves, whether that's like at a comfortable versus cushy rate, like that's debatable, right? But they aren't fully wholeheartedly dependent on a man like say their mothers or their grandmothers or their great grandmothers might have been. And I say that because everyone loves to say, oh my gosh, marriage back in the day was so much better. But women married because they had to and because they had no income and they could not live off of nothing. And now that it's not
They couldn't even
necessarily,
like open a bank account. Like
couldn't do it, they
it's
couldn't have a credit
crazy.
card, couldn't do anything. They needed their husband's permission up until like the 70s, I want to say,
Yeah.
for a very long time. So, yeah, that's why grandma and grandpa stayed together. But that's also why you're seeing like a lot of women who are either widows or divorced at a later age choosing to remain single. They don't want to get back into that dynamic where they are with a man that they have to serve or whatever that might be for them, or who might be abusive, or maybe they just want their own space, right? So you take away the provider piece, you're left with the protector. And we all know we had this huge debate last year about the bear versus the man in the woods, and everyone was caught in just a disarray about the answer. Well, I say everyone. Men were upset about the answer that women were providing, and they couldn't understand, why would you want to be in the woods with the bear? Like, I don't understand that. Why, a man's going to protect you. But the truth that was, all women could think of was how afraid they'd be of the man, who would probably potentially put them in more danger. I'm speaking, who knows what could happen in that dynamic, but women don't know bears, women know men, and women know the amount of dangerous situations that they've been put in with men who are strangers or men that they know, men who have said that they love them, etc. And so this kind of facade of what a man's supposed to be, this protector, it's slowly been whittled away as women have confessed that men are the very people that they should be fearing, even the men that they allegedly love. So you take away this provider protector thing from a man, and you get someone who's kind of lost. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? I've been socialized to be this patriarchal figure in my household and in society, and society told me I'm supposed to have all these things and I'm supposed to be at the top in these ways, but women don't need me. They don't want me in this way. So how can I establish myself in this space and, feel more like myself? And the answer has been fatherhood, because kids absolutely need a provider. Kids absolutely need a protector. And what makes fatherhood particularly unique in 2025, right, is that millennials have kind of really worked hard to make fatherhood cool again. Um, Fatherhood and the nuclear family was popularized in the 1950s, right? There was like this idea of what the perfect family should look like. That is a picture that I would argue we are all still working around to try to achieve today. Like, that is the image in most people's minds, what a perfect family looks like. And while there was a father back in the day, he wasn't really home. He was at work. He was doing the provider part, right? And so what fathers are doing today that are just much different than the past is making sure that they're present in their kids' lives. And that's where the fun comes, because men, and I don't want to generalize here, Mario, but men like challenges. Like, they like to conquer something, right? They can't do that with women because we're having a moment right now, but they can conquer this idea of being a good father, and they can try to rise to the occasion of being a present dad as much as they can. And so now it's become this kind of bragging right of saying, oh, this is my kid, this is my family. Ideally, that will eventually ideally it will eventually become a bragging right to also brag about being married, but that's in a weird place, right? It depends on who that person is and how they feel about dating and marriage and whatever. But definitely the fatherhood piece is something that a lot of men are gravitating towards, and they're just really happy to be more involved, assuming that they are. Sometimes they just want to wear the badge of the father, but I'm not going to get into the details of that.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's I was gonna comment on that, but so one thing, like a question I have though, like I mean, it sounds positive. I mean, I think there's in terms of what's emerging, but I can't help but think that like not too many people are having kids anymore, and like um, certainly way less people are getting married. So that like I feel like there's a tension right there. If that's the emerging framework for masculinity, and yet it's not attainable for many, like what are the implications for that?
Definitely still attainable. Maybe not by the most traditional means. There are a lot of men that are fine having kids out of wedlock. Okay, as long as they can have the kid that they want. Not all. I don't. I want to make sure I say it. A lot of men want the wife and the kid. There was an article in New York Times where they were kind of talking to men who want children, and we're finding that men want kids more often than women do. And some men want them so bad, and they're having a hard time finding suitable partners who also want children. So some of them are actually choosing to go at fatherhood alone. They're choosing to have surrogates or to find or to adopt, because this is such a big part of who they want to be. And so we'll likely see more of that in the future, men securing their path to fatherhood by any means necessary for those who really want that as a part of their identity, and their existence, especially as they're getting older. I think too, Mario, what's also coming out more increasingly, which I'm kind of happy about, is the correlation between unhealthy children and, well, men, and the decline in sperm quality as they age. And I say happy because that is something that has always been on the shoulders of women for all of these years of saying, oh, if you wait too late, you're going to have an unhealthy kid or you're going to have more miscarriages or whatever that might be. But increasingly, we're finding that actually the fathers play a big role in the development of healthy fetuses, not only their sperm, but also like their health in general. So, what we might start seeing because of that is, again, a desire for families at younger ages for men. And I say that because, a lot of these men in their 40s are trying to get these 20 somethings to have their kids. And the 20 somethings are saying no, but it might stop a generation from waiting so long to have the kids in the first place. So we'll see.
So like before we get into the last category, like let's stop there. Like what are some brand implications for this? Like, I mean, have you done any work in this space? Like how are brands trying to tackle understanding this, and how is this going to shift marketing? Because you did mention that, like, and I agree with you that that framework of the nuclear family is still kind of there in terms of where we're all operating from, but it's changing. So
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important is for brands to feature fathers in interesting ways in their messaging and in their communications. I think it's important for brands to know like this perpetual bachelor kind of guy is kind of fallen out of fashion, unless he's young, right? But if he is young and a perpetual bachelor, like he can't be too promiscuous, however you're showing him, So kind of thinking about what the cool guy is who might be too young for fatherhood, they're going to have to reshape that narrative. He's going to be someone that's a little bit more emotionally in tune with himself and those around him, right? This is why that show, oh my gosh, Nobody Wants This was so popular, because the main male character seemed to be so emotionally intelligent, and just in tune with what the woman was going on before she could even have the words to articulate it. That is like the model of the ideal guy, realistic or not, who knows? But brands are going to have to just take notice that the ideal man is just a little bit more aware of things outside of himself. And men themselves have also mentioned and stated like they want to be shown in a positive light. They don't like being shown as buffoons or idiots or like the dumb jock, right? Just because he looks good means he's got nothing going on up here. Whether or not that's a reflection of who they are when they see themselves in media, they want to be seen in the best light possible. So brands are just going to have to keep track of what that looks like and how that evolves for men. Showing the out of touch dad who doesn't know where his kids' binkies are, it doesn't know the feeding time, like that's not going to work anymore. Showing a father who's deeply involved, who knows the routine, who might set the routine for his kids, that's what they're going to gravitate towards, because that is the ideal, that is aspirational, and that's what everyone is working more towards, for sure.
is that a positive thing? I mean, and I'm just
You seem so hesitant. Yes.
yeah,
Yes, I mean, of course it is. I think all of these changes are positive. It's
yeah.
what's happening is, even though there are tensions around it and some men of a certain era are fighting these expansions of masculinity, right? It's broadening, and it's broadening so that men can exist in a way that they are more human, right? More emotional, more in touch, less individually driven, if you will. And while this narrative is happening, listen, I know it's happening in culture. Like men are increasingly alone and they're not dating, and like that's something that also has to rectify itself. But showing them, at least as far from the brand perspective, showing them in the most aspirational way possible is going to be the way to win here. And knowing what that looks like in a way that's in tune with how culture is today is key. And I say aspirational way at most, sorry, I say showing them in the most aspirational way possible, knowing that, incel culture exists. But I don't think even incels want to be depicted as the slimy, gross man getting it in with everyone. You know what I mean? I think that there's limits to that. They do want to be seen as desirable for sure. Um, but we just have to be aware of what that could look like and like the stages of it. And if we're going to set the example for an aspirational theme of masculinity. Let's do it in a way that moves culture forward as opposed to pushing us back to more toxic iterations of masculinity, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and I was hesitant to ask because I view it as positive, but I feel like, and I agree with you with brands. I mean, commercials I see, I think are moving towards that. But we were just talking about podcasts, and like that doesn't seem to be. That seems to me like very broy, like Joe Rogan. I mean, the number one podcast. That to me, I mean, and maybe I mean I haven't listened to it, but I don't think about involved father prototype there.
Yeah, I mean, there are many podcasts, right? He is one voice. There are a lot of loud voices, right, that are happening in the ecosphere that have definitely gotten a big following and will maintain that following. But there are also, I know because I follow them, smaller accounts and other voices where I'm increasingly stumbling upon podcasts with men checking each other publicly, saying you shouldn't do these things or you shouldn't see life in this way. And I think that that's really this is actually what sparked this report for me. That's really interesting to me because men in my at least in the time in the years that I've lived here have never publicly criticized one another, at least not on a social platform. The um the tendency is to say, you know, don't put any part of us down. Don't talk bad about us. Like there's a group dynamic of generalizing men because they just want to stick up for one another. That's usually the commentary. So if I say, oh, you know, men do this, there's always going to be not all men. You know what I mean? But in places where they are in conversation with each other, what is interesting is there is a lot more room for men to hold one another accountable. And some, and I say some, they're younger in nature, they're doing that. They're listening to their guys tell these stories and they're asking them questions and they're asking them, why didn't you do this? Or why did you do that? Or that's really weird, you know? And I'm not one to say that that never happens because again, I'm not a guy. I'm not a part of guys' conversations, but it has never, in my experience, happened publicly, which is really the point of interest for me. Like you're calling someone out on a podcast, on your social media platform. Everyone can see this. How is that going to go? And it seems to be working fine for those in those dynamics that I've seen so far.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a good segue into like the third category emerging.
Yeah.
Um, you,
Yeah.
you,
Okay. So I was in my social medias one day and I was again I was kind of coming across different things. And I came across this guy who is a self-proclaimed dating coach. I have to think of his name, but he's got his whole Instagram page is dedicated to helping men get dates. And the way that it works is that guys call into his show and they ask him to evaluate their bodies. And they say, hey, man, what do I need to do to look better? Mario, when I first saw this, I said, what is happening here? But it's just like genuine, like
is it
genuine.
like a big following, like, or is it
He's got
niche?
a he's got a he's got a decent following. He's a black guy. He's very buff. You know, he looks the part. You know, he's handsome, whatever. And the guys calling him are of every background. Actually, it's a lot of white guys calling him, every background, and they literally just kind of say, "Hey, man, can you grade me? What do I need to do better?" And he'll say, "Well, let me get a look at you." And they'll step back from the camera. Okay, this is a visual conversation. They'll step back from the
Okay.
camera. And they'll turn around and he'll look at their bodies or he'll look at their hair and he'll say, well, what are you eating? Are you in the gym? What are your habits like? Do you smoke? Do you drink? What's going on with your hair? You know, all you need is a shave. And if you do that, and what are you reading? Like it is very much like a analysis that's happening here. And they're like eating it up. They're just like, yeah, man, I'm just trying to do this. I'm trying to get better. And he is very much like a person for some of these individuals. Again, I don't follow him heavily. Like just giving them some feedback, I think, in a world where they're not always allowed to ask questions about their appearance and feel comfortable about it, but they're doing it on his social media feed, and they're looking at him as an expert to say, this is what I need to do to look, to dress better, to have my body look the way I want it to look, to have my hair look the way I want it to look. Maybe I'm on the right path, and maybe I need to do some other things. And he'll tell him, like, he's really critical. He can be mean sometimes, and sometimes guys have come in with unfavorable opinions, and he'll say, you need to stop that. The reason that women don't like you is because you're sitting here looking like this, or whatever that might be. And he says information in a way that they say, okay. And, who knows if behavior change happens after that. But it was just really interesting. And I say that to say the emerging space for masculinity is increasingly appearance and aesthetic driven, right? We're in this place where men are going to be increasingly concerned about their looks. Now, there's a couple of things here. Because you're an older millennial, if you were too concerned about your looks back in the day, what's the first thing they would say? Yeah, you're gay, because that was associated with femininity. And so now we're at this point where actually there's open
I
analysis.
remember the Metro. Remember Metrosexual?
Yeah, metrosexual, exactly. And you're like, is he or is he not?
Yeah.
Just what is that? But I think we're at this great place where, as you may know from the brand side, male grooming has just boomed as a category. And as a result, you're finding more men being concerned about what they look like and how they come across. Now, couple things have led to this, right? I always love to say queer eye for the straight guy was definitely the pioneer in this space of just getting these schleppy men to care about their hygiene and their appearance, right? These poor women married to these men, my goodness. But that represents like a particular generation of men that were raised to not care about their appearance because they didn't have to, right? Society is just like, oh yeah, if you care too much, you're gay, or you're not a manly man, if you will. Queer Eye for the Straight Guy kind of helped shift that needle a bit. I also think now that we are more into visual communications, the image is more important than ever. And, for a long time, we've been in this space and it's always been like, oh, women need to look this part because it's always men are more visual creatures. They want you to look good. They want you to look pretty. You got to look put together. But actually, as women are gaining more share of income, we are also just as critical because we have the ability to be, right? It's not just about your wallet. It's not just about what you can provide. It's not just about who you can protect. It's like, do I want to look at you in your face? And do I want to deal with your beer belly gut, in addition to just larger health and wellness trends that, Gen Z is obsessed with being healthy. So behind this is this desire and this drive to look as healthy and to look as fit as possible. But the shift is that men are not only looking at women to be gorgeous and attractive, but they're also judging other men who don't have their shit together and don't look the part that they need to look to get the type of women, job, access that they want to get.
And one thing this makes me think about too is like I saw, which I thought was an interesting observation. Someone was like, as a male, being fit, like, is one of the, this is another male saying this, like, best markers of success. Because it shows like you're showing up to the gym regularly, you're eating right, you're taking care of yourself, which is something that you can't purchase. It's not like nice clothes or jewelry or something, right? So, is that related?
Absolutely. Men are just being more vocal about it. They're shaming people. Like they're kind of shaming each other. Like, yeah, man, you need to eat better. You need to like lay off the alcohol. You're out here doing drugs. Why are you doing that? And it's not everyone. Let's be clear. These are
Yeah.
now they're still fringe conversations. But these are conversations that are being led by the influencers. So what do they call them? Himfluencers. I don't know why we need to do a separate thing for men, but male influencers are also leading these kind of conversations saying, take care of your body, take care of your gut, take care of your health. And that way you can like stop complaining that you're not where you want to be in life, because men do see appearance as a big part of anybody's success, their own and women, right? And so I think that's what we're going to be moving towards as men kind of lead with this aesthetic driven idea of what success should look like. This I don't know, healthier looking man. I don't know if the habits will happen or not, but everyone's going to try to look apart for sure.
I think of also this whole trend of biohacking, like
Mm-hmm.
Huberman. I don't know if you're familiar with Andrew Huberman. Like, um,
I think I've heard of his name, but I know the is that the guy who like tries to biohack every part of his day and he gets up and does all these things. I think I've heard of him or someone like
there's a guy that like wants to live forever
yes, I think
and
I've heard
be
of him.
younger,
Yeah,
Brian Johnson.
yeah.
That's but then there's Huberman, who's like this. He's the guy. He's like a PhD from Stanford. He's the one who popularized cold plunging and all that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but yeah, kind of just optimizing. Like, if you're going to work out, this is the time of day, and you should see the sunrise at this. You should see sunrise light, and like there's this whole subculture of just biohackers that like
Yeah,
optimize every part of their day.
yeah. And so you think of that, you think of the propensity for men to listen to other men on podcasts, which is high. And then you think of the, I don't know under this administration, but probably the easier access to things like Ozempic, Manjaro, and weight loss opportunities. And we're going to be increasingly in this kind of aesthetic Olympics, for those who can access it or afford to or make time for it, if you will, or can even get the right foods to do it. Like that's really where the disparity is going to come in. Like, can you afford this? Do you have time to do it, if you will? But it's going to become like the new aspiration for masculinity for sure.
That doesn't feel healthy to me.
Yeah, that actually leads to the next
That
the
does
next
not feel healthy
evolution.
to me.
That leads to the next evolution, which is what I call this violent male body dysmorphia. Listen, not everything's a straight line to success, Mario. Okay, but I do feel like this obsession is going to turn bad for just a little while. Men actually already have a lot of body dysmorphia. It's just not socialized or spoken about just yet. I think in next couple of years it will be spoken about a lot. And I want to, I didn't bring this example up, but like, look at what's happening in the tech world, where the tech space was dominated by hoodie wearing, feeble bodied men who were mostly known as nerds who like to play foosball. You know what I mean? And suddenly the owners of those companies are jacked out of nowhere. Okay. They've got hair and beards and they look the part, which is also fueling my guess, if you will, that this is going to be moving towards a more aesthetic place. But as boys and men try to get there, it's going to be not necessarily in the healthiest ways. This cycling of diets, putting there's this desire to have a lot of muscles, and how boys are going to try to get that muscle might not necessarily be in the healthiest way.
One thing I've seen that's a concerning trend, because I'm in fitness socials that's consume that. Um, Something that was taboo when I was growing up, like roiding and testosterone replacement therapy. There's a huge community of just people openly sharing their steroid cycles now.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, it's
that will probably
crazy.
become normalized. As well as things like learning about, creatine and, being over zealous about powder, different types of protein powders or different type of protein supplements or workout supplements. Like we're entering into a new workout sphere where everyone's trying to hack their workouts and everyone's trying to get the most out of the muscle burn. And like, let's be clear, I say everyone because women are also now lifting weights, right? And so again, I don't know if weightlifting is going to fall out of favor with men because women are also doing that in the gym. You know what I mean? So it's a conversation to be had, but it's not only the body, it's also hair, right? Beards, teeth. The teeth situation. I don't know why so many people are getting veneers. They're just knocking out their own natural teeth and taking in putting in false, teeth, but people are doing anything to get the look. And so it's a trend we'll have to watch. But again, I think I said before we began this call, I think men are going to be on the precipice of their own empowerment movement soon in the next couple of years. But it's going to be because of some toxic things that are discovered and spoken about, and someone's going to come up with a new way to push forward. It's probably going to be Dove. They do really great at pioneering new ways to have conversations about self-esteem. And I wouldn't be surprised if Dove or a brand like them leads the way for how men can view themselves differently in a more positive light, or go about things differently in a more positive way in the next 5 to 10 years, if you will.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, just opening up the opportunity also for brands to, I mean, there's been like weird attempts, like bro wipes and like at like I think there's just like a more inclusive way, hopefully, that all pans out as well. That dovetails with that, with more positive body image.
Agree. Just like gender neutral things, like it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
bro duty.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're at the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and talking. I found your report on LinkedIn. Like, do you have a URL that you can share, or what's the best way for people that want to download it?
I have all of my
Is it on your
reports.
website?
It's on my website. Yeah. I have all of my reports on my website. You can go to touchofwhit.com. That's touchofwhit.com. And if you go to the link that says knowledge and from the mind of wit, you'll find all of my titillating reports there on just about anything.
Yeah, I remember you have that really cool future of the household one too. That was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, exactly. I'm always thinking about something and writing a report about something. So
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining, Whitney, and thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.